So I've been trying to figure out if it's possible to replicate the Ozempic effect without using drugs, but using intuitive eating. And I started this journey about 3-4 weeks ago now. You can follow along the previous videos where I discuss what intuitive eating really is and the main 10 principles. Last week, I put this theory to the ultimate test, which was a ski trip. 10 days in the mountains, in the Alps, which basically just means 10 days of fondue, cold weather, long lunches, also just traveling away from home. For somebody who has been a binge eater, travel was often a very big trigger for me. And that's because when you're away from home, you have less control over everything, basically. You don't have your kitchen, you don't have your usual supermarkets, your markets, you don't have your food. You eat with other people the whole time, so you're not in control of the menu, you're eating out a lot. And so I would historically have found travel very triggering. I remember one ski trip I went on, I was in love with a guy who was going on the same ski trip as me, and I had been on a very restrictive diet coming up to it, and no carbs probably, and basically I was in a chalet where they left out cakes for you when you came home from the mountains, and I just attacked. They'd made like an apple pie, and I was like, oh, I'll just have one bite, it won't break the diet. And then I just attacked it, basically. Not my proudest moment. Part of the binge cycle is the kind of last supper mentality, which is, well, this is the only chance I'll have to eat what I want, so I have to eat everything. A huge part of the intuitive eating guidelines is that you have to stop you have to let yourself eat whatever you want all the time in order to stop any of the Last Supper style binges happening. And honestly, so I've been having a lot of doubts about intuitive eating as a principle and the 10 principles. And one of my biggest doubts was I didn't think that if I was ever given full permission to eat everything I wanted, I didn't think that it would be possible for me to eat in a controlled or sane way. Yeah, so it's day 3 of my ski holiday, and I promised you a diary cam. So here I am in the chalet, just mountain sun setting over there. I think the things I've taken from the intuitive eating workbook are really starting to feel like I'm putting them into practice, which is amazing. So what that looks like is, instead of feeling the need to just eat all the pastries and all the bread and all the melted cheese, it's because I'm on holiday and therefore it's the only time I'll be able to ever eat this stuff before I go back to my strict regimented lifestyle, and knowing that I don't have to go back to anything, that my daily life can look like this, can look like freedom, can look like choice. It's just taking out that urgency and that panic and that need to eat as much as possible. I'm stopping when I'm full because I'm not just trying to squeeze in as much food as possible. And the big difference is there's no urgency. There's no feeling of I'm on holiday, I need to eat everything I can. And that's really refreshing and so pleasant. Also, like, having eaten well for a few days, I think 4 or 5 days, you notice the difference in your body and you notice how the clothes fit, and it's a nice feeling. And I felt like I got into this lovely rhythm of being outside all day, so skiing, exercising, hiking, and then having these big meals on the mountain, but really like feeling satiated and satisfied. And I think the combination of being outdoors and being so happy, as well as like the alcohol and the wine, that it usually would lead to a sort of crisis, but it actually did the opposite. And I did come back having eaten pretty much everything that I desired. I had a few major breakthroughs, and one of them is that I haven't actually gained any weight this week. And usually after a ski trip or any trip away, you'd expect to gain some weight, and then you know, the way it used to work is you would level that out by a restrictive week after. Whereas this week, I really did just follow as much as possible my intuition and ate what I wanted, whether I decided whether I wanted like that carbonara or that fondue. So yeah, that was a great win for me, and it's really solidified for me the idea that there could be a future for me where intuitive eating means a healthy and balanced attitude towards food, but without gaining weight. I also had another breakthrough about intuitive eating, which is that I went deep into a Reddit subthread about it and realized how ridiculously privileged this entire concept is, and especially when you lay it against my wonderful Parisian life and my ski trips. So that's something I'm going to address in the video too. And finally, I want to talk about how with intuitive eating, I want to find a middle ground between intuitive eating and being happy with my body at any size, and still having the body that I want. In other words, having a healthy relationship with food without giving up my goal of being a certain weight and size. I've been trying to apply as many of the practices of intuitive eating as I can, but obviously I've only been doing this for a few weeks, and I know a lot of it is going to take a lot of training and a lot of time to get my head around and to get used to. The practices that really started to help me on the ski trip and on my vacation away were really listening to what I wanted to eat. And so whereas before my brain would just be telling me to eat everything I could because this would be the last chance I would have to eat it before going back to a restrictive lifestyle. And so I wouldn't even think about what I wanted to eat. I would just eat anything that felt a bit naughty because I could kind of relax into the idea that, well, this isn't the last chance you'll have to eat. So really just think about what you want to eat. I was able to make decisions that felt much more attuned. I was also tuning into how I felt as I ate, to that first bite awareness. Trying not to have a snack between meals because I really wanted to feel that hunger. And you know, how delicious a sandwich can feel when it's eaten on the side of a mountain, and how much enjoyment you can get from eating what you really want and really feel like. And that's even multiplied during a time when you're doing a lot of exercise and you're outside and you're busy because you're starving. The other thing I was able to do was to really notice when I'd had that last bite that felt good, and when the next bite started to lose its appeal, I was able to say, okay, I think that's enough for me. Proof of concept for me was being able to, first of all, walk away from meals feeling satisfied and satiated and like I'd really eaten what I wanted, but also to know that I hadn't overeaten, binged, or even gained weight at the end of the week. So today we're talking about the difference between willpower and biology. The interview I want to talk to you about is by a dietitian called Eliza Kingsford. And she basically explains that there are two sides to our hunger. So there's the hardware side and the software side. The hardware side is the part that the drugs can replicate, which is the actual communication between the brain and the stomach and the fullness cues and the dopamine hits. But then behind that, she talks about the fact that there's the software. And so the software is the mental training and the brain development that you can go through to listen to your body and understand its cues. And she really helped me understand that for chronic dieters or people who have gone through binge eating disorder or had extreme restriction, is that our software has been completely messed with. So for us, because our bodies have known extreme restriction, the spike of dopamine can be much higher and we're much slower to feel the fullness too. And that's because our bodies are reacting to what was essentially a famine for them. So it made me realize that while there is a place for intuitive eating, that there are also people who are just going to need GLP-1s or Ozempic in order to ever get to the kind of place they want with food noise. But as I said, that's not an option for me, and it's not the route that I'm going to take. So it only makes me want to go further with intuitive eating and to really keep putting this to the test and to keep living out these exercises to find a way to continue to have this healthy relationship with food, silence the food noise, but also just enjoy eating as much as I did last week without changing my weight or size. So I had another big realization this week, which nearly put me off this entire video series, and I really questioned whether I should keep going with it or not. And it's because I looked at Reddit and I started looking at intuitive eating on Reddit and all the subthreads. And I found so many people who were just saying, I just don't want to hear another thin white woman tell me intuitive eating works, because it might work for her body, but it definitely doesn't for mine. There's such a privilege element to this video series I'm making. One is that I'm born into a thin body, and that any of my struggles with my body and food have been because of a desire for extreme thinness or extreme fitness, and not because I'm necessarily not healthy. In other words, I don't have diabetes. I'm not obese. To a lot of people out there, this entire series will seem just like stupid and overly privileged. Like, I'm talking about ski trips and I'm speaking to you from my Paris apartment. So like, I'm not worrying about food stamps. I'm not worrying about if it's organic or not. And like, I understand that is a massive privilege, and I don't want to not acknowledge that in some way, shape or form. But as somebody who did live with binge eating disorder, it's still important for me to find peace and happiness when it comes to food in my body, even though I know that it's from a place of extreme privilege to even be able to go on this journey. So yeah, and I just want to keep coming back to this, that I'm not a dietitian and I'm not a nutritionist, but I'm just someone who's going on a journey to find out if intuitive eating can work for me. I just hope that by sharing this story, well, it's also useful for me to have to build out these videos every week, because it's really teaching me to take in the knowledge and put it into practice. It's forcing me to do that. And at the same time, if sharing what I'm going through or what I've been through helps any of you on your journey to intuitive eating or silencing the food noise, then I think that's great. I think that the best thing I've learned so far from intuitive eating is just getting rid of the all or nothing mindset. So my old cycle would have been Monday to Friday, extreme restriction. And it wasn't necessarily that I was restricting the quantities of food I ate, because as soon as I started to do keto and kind of like eating whole foods, I realized I could eat quite a lot of food and not gain weight. I never counted calories. So my restriction was more just in the types of food I would eat. Then come Friday night, the diet rebel would take over and I would just say, fuck it. Like, I'd probably have weighed myself that morning, be happy, and everything would go out the window, knowing that on Monday I could make up for it by extreme restriction again. But what it led to was just me eating everything I could and everything in sight, whether or not I really wanted it, because I felt like I had this tiny window of time where I was allowed to eat it, and therefore the clock was ticking and this was the last supper. And one thing I've really taken away from intuitive eating is that is not the case. And the more at peace I am with eating things when I want and when I really feel like eating them, the less I feel this urgency to eat things that I'm not allowed to eat or was not allowed to eat. You know, there's a lot of types of chocolate treats, and now I'm just realizing, like, whoa, that's way too sweet. I don't actually enjoy that at all. And the same with Haribo. I used to think I was obsessed with it, and it would be like one of the things I would be so excited to go and buy if it was the weekend, but it just doesn't appeal to me anymore. The taste, like, it's sickly. So much of it was just because of restriction and not actually because of what I was looking for. The thing that I still found the most tricky about intuitive eating is letting go of the desire to be thin, letting go of the desire to weigh myself and see a certain number on the scales. The idea is that your body will find its natural weight, and you might gain a bit of weight at the start, but then it will all balance out. And I would really like to trust that. And I think it's going to be really important for me to let go of the number on the scales in order for me to really find out if intuitive eating works. Because I do say, like, if you're somebody who still cares and is going to be checking your weight, then you're not ready, and it's going to undermine the entire program. So you can't do both. You can't have some restriction or guilt about eating and also become an intuitive eater. They just don't work together. It's like trying to drive a car with the accelerator on and the brake at the same time. So while I'm trying to figure this all out, I've also been listening to some podcasts and some interviews, and I found an amazing podcast by a woman called Sabrina Mannion. I'll share the link below. Maybe I'll even get her to come on my YouTube channel at some point, or maybe I'll be a guest on her podcast. And she addresses so many of the doubts and fears that I've been talking to you about that have been coming up for me, including the desire to be thin and can it work alongside intuitive eating. And she says that it can, as long as the desire to be thin is not an obsession. So it can't be that the most important thing for me is that I weigh a certain number. It needs to be, I'm happy for that to be a byproduct, but my main goal is to reach intuitive eating and reduce the food noise. So I'm trying to find a middle ground. And what I'm starting to realize as well is that when you're a true intuitive eater, you do often make healthy choices that will lead for you to have a thinner body. For example, this week skiing, I didn't want cheeseburger and chips at every meal. There are some meals that I wanted, like the delicious Caesar salad, or I didn't want a sugary breakfast every day. I wanted the porridge, or I wanted fresh fruit. There was plenty of times when the food that I craved and the food that I gave myself was the quote unquote healthier version. And I think ultimately that's where I will land, or where I hope to land. But you know, the main takeaway for me is still just being able to label all the voices in my head, and really listen to what I want to eat and stop eating when I'm full, and just learning those things Just those practices themselves have really had a huge impact. So what I'm doing next is I've signed up to Sabrina Magnon's workshop, and I'm doing it tonight. It's a beginner's guide to intuitive eating, so I'm going to report back on everything I learn in that. In the meantime, I've also decided to create a PDF for you guys so that you can download and get started on your own intuitive eating journey if that's something that's interesting to you. So please do have a look in the show notes below to download it. My first week of intuitive eating, I got so disheartened when I saw that I'd gained weight. But now that I was able to spend a full week basically eating whatever my body really wanted to eat, and that included a lot of melted cheese, I feel really inspired to keep going. And so I'm going to keep going. And my next step is to talk about the book The 4-Day Win by Martha Beck, which is different from intuitive eating in many ways, but there are some similarities. If you're also tired of the pendulum swing of extreme restriction and extreme binging, then just come along with me for the journey. But I am going on my honeymoon a week from today. So it's going to be very interesting to see if I can keep intuitive eating whilst in Vietnam. But also, if you want to see what I'm packing and where we're going, planning on going, etc., then I will drop some videos about the trip. Thanks for watching.